And welcome to our virtual forum, Carbon Neutrality for Janesville by 2050. This forum is presented by the League of Women Voters of Janesville and our co-sponsors, the Wealthy Environmental Center and the Ice Age Trail Alliance. We have members of the Wealthy Environmental Center and Ice Age Trail Alliance on our panel, and I will let them introduce themselves here in a moment. But to get started, I'll introduce myself. I am Eileen Newcomer, and I will be your moderator for this evening's forum. I'm a League member, a Janesville resident, and I served on the Sustainable Janesville Committee for 4 years. My term just ended last Tuesday. And I am very proud of the work that the Sustainable Janesville Committee does in our community, and the fact that our city has this citizen committee to help inform the work that the City Council does. And the carbon neutrality resolution that we're talking about here today actually stems from the work of the Sustainable Janesville Committee. So just so we're all on the same page, the City of Janesville City Council passed the resolution in February that set the goal for the city to reach a carbon neutral emissions target by 2050. The resolution was passed with an amendment saying that the carbon neutrality would need to be adopted into the city's strategic plan for 2022. And the strategic plan will be discussed in July of this year. And the purpose of this forum is to provide Janesville residents with context and the rationale for the resolution, and to discuss the challenges and opportunities that this carbon neutrality goal presents for the city. So I want to thank you all for attending tonight's forum, and I want to give a special thank you to our panelists for being part of this discussion. Before we move on to introductions of the panelists, I do want to go over a few etiquette rules. We ask that everyone in the audience, please mute yourself so that we don't get background noise during the conversation. And then panelists, please mute yourself while you're not talking, but obviously unmute yourself when you're going to be talking. We do have a segment of the forum for questions from the audience. If you would like to submit questions, please type them into the chat. We will keep a running list of questions and pose them to the panelists as we have time. And then finally, just know that the forum is being recorded, and it will be available for later viewing in the next day or two. So now I would like to move into the introduction of our panel. I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. Let us know what your role is, maybe just a little something about why you're interested in sustainability or how your sustainability is related to your role. Keep it, I guess, pretty brief because we do have a lot to get through in the hour and a half that we're here together. But I do want to give you a chance to let our audience know a little bit about you. So let's start with Maggie Darr, the Operations Director for the City of Janesville. Would you give a quick introduction of yourself?
Thanks, Eileen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Maggie Darr. As Eileen stated, I'm the Operations Director with the City of Janesville. First, I just want to say thank you to the League for putting together this forum. I grew up with a mother who was very active in our local League of Women Voters and was a co-founder of the Environmental Subcommittee. And so this is kind of close to my heart. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I've been the operations director in our public works department just since January, but I've been with the City of Janesville for going on 8 years now. I came from the city manager's office, so I'm of a generalist background. I have about 12 years of experience in local government and nonprofit management. I have a master's in public administration. And so my heart is really in local government administration and effectively serving communities. So appreciate the opportunity today.
Thanks, Maggie. Next, Dan Cunningham of Forward Janesville. Dan, will you introduce yourself?
Hi there. I hope you can hear me okay. I have an automatic sensitivity about not being able to hear on Zoom calls. So if you can't hear me, raise your hand now. Okay, good. Dan Cunningham, Vice President of Government Relations and Education for Forward Janesville. Been there for about 15 years actually in this role, and it's really working with the business community to see what kind of priorities they have for local government. And certainly interested in this topic from a business perspective and what the businesses in Janesville might be willing to do to get to carbon neutral by 2050. So I also appreciate the work of the League. We've been involved with the League for many years, mostly through co-sponsorship of the great candidate forums that you guys do, where you guys do all the work and I just show up and take a little bit of the credit. So thank you so much for what you do and appreciate this kind of thought leadership. I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Next, Wes Enterline, the Sustainability Coordinator at Uw-Whitewater. Wes, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Eileen. So I'm Wes Enterline, Sustainability Director at Uw-Whitewater. I've been in this role for 13 years, I believe. Yeah, going on 13 years. So a sustainability director is definitely a generalist position, similar to Maggie's background. I do a little bit of everything related to sustainability, both through student engagement as well as campus operations. Lately, I've been focused a lot on climate and energy related issues on campus as we've gone through a budget crisis with COVID and decreasing enrollment. So sustainability is becoming relevant in some various different ways on campus. And I'm a citizen of Janesville. I was on the Sustainable Janesville Committee for 5 years, almost 5.5, I think. I snuck in on somebody else's term and then did my own 2 terms. So I was in for the long haul. So just happy to be involved and glad to see this ordinance had passed. Thank you.
Next is Jeff Hanson of Align Energy. Jeff, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Jeff Hanson, I'm Director of Environmental Services and Corporate Sustainability at Align Energy. I've been with the company for about a little over 13 years now. In this role for probably the last 5 or 6. Prior to that, I spent about the same amount of time at Wisconsin DNR in their air quality program, and have slided over to Alliant about 2008. And it's interesting, at that time, we were building coal plants, or that's what was happening. Coal plants were getting built, power plants were being expanded. Now we're setting goals and retiring plants. And so my job has shifted 180 degrees, and it's really been a remarkable time especially over the last 5 or 6 years as we've progressed in a completely different direction. And really looking forward to talking a little bit more about that tonight.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Next is Megan Levy of Wisconsin DNR. Megan, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Eileen. My name's Megan Levy. I'm actually with the Wisconsin State Energy Office that is currently housed at the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. There's a little mix up in trading emails back and forth. So one version of the poster said the wrong agency, although I have the utmost respect for DNR and everything that they do. I'm with a different regulatory agency and I have no regulatory power. So my role in the State Energy Office is one of an advocate for energy efficiency. I work with the Energy Independent Communities program. We've got 147 plus members across the entire state who back in 2008, 2009, most of them committed to 25% reduction in their energy use or 25% renewables by 2025. And a lot of those communities are cited in this great piece of local legislation by Janesville that says, hey, these other cities are doing this. Why aren't we going to 100% carbon free? So I like to see the shout out for the other communities. Similar to Maggie and Wes and others on the call, I'm a public servant. I've been doing it for about 20 years. It's my joy to work with every single community in the state, every tribal nation, anyone I can, and talk about energy. So, and also sustainability. One of the things we do a lot of is data gathering and baseline creation. We create a baseline for 75 million plus gross square feet of state-owned space because we want to lead by example in our state-owned buildings. And then we're starting to see that. I don't want to steal DNR's thunder because they're doing some great stuff, and Dane County's been putting a lot of solar out. So I'm really excited for the conversation. Thank you so much to the League of Women Voters. Your work is incredibly important, and I'm just honored to be here and be a part of it. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for correcting me. I appreciate it. Got over the hurdle of the name and then messed up the second part. But next we have Andy Stoltman with the DNR.
Yeah, that's correct this time. Thanks, Eileen. And don't sell yourself short, Megan. The PSC does some incredible work also. I am with the Division of Forestry. I'm the section chief for Forest Economics and Ecology, which is an obscure title, which basically means I work with the forest research and sciences side of things, including climate change. And in a previous life at DNR, I did a lot of work. So more natural climate solutions is where I am up my alley. But in a previous part of my work at DNR, I also worked extensively with urban inventory and quantifying the benefits, including carbon storage, of urban forests. And I'm also a member of the Science Advisory Board for WICI, which is the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, which is a joint venture between the DNR and the Nelson Institute at UW-Madison. And thank you very much for having me today. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Next. Did I freeze?
Yep.
Sorry. Brenda, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Brenda Plackins. I'm the Executive Director of Welty Environmental Center. We're an environmental education center located in Big Hill Park in Beloit, pretty much exactly halfway between Beloit and Janesville. We've been in operation since 1999. Our focus is environmental education, so very much on learning and activities around nature-based education. We were pleased to be the recipients of the City of Beloit's proclamation to become carbon neutral by 2040. This basically signaled an intention to start looking into what this means for the policies of the city. And so I feel a little bit like a spy tonight to hear implications for Janesville and how we might replicate those down in Beloit. And we've also been partnering with the League of Women Voters in Beloit to also try to inform the residents of what all of this means, and on the environmental committee. And so very happy to be here and here. I feel like I'm sort of representing the voice of the nonprofit sector and what service organizations can help either with advocacy or education or motivating people to participate. So again, thank you so much for having me as well.
Thank you, Brenda. And then last but not least, our final panelist is Dennis James, also representing one of our co-sponsor organizations, the Ice Age Trail Alliance. Dennis, will you introduce yourself?
Certainly. My name is Dennis James. I've been volunteering with the Ice Age Trail for 10 years. I'm with the Rock County chapter. And for those of you who may not know this, is the Ice Age Trail is not just in Rock County. It is a 1,200-mile trail through Wisconsin. And, you know, essentially we are advocating people hiking, but we do support multi-use trails, et cetera. I'm a graduate of the walking college through America Walks about 3 or 4 years ago, which really gave me a lot of lessons in advocacy for bikers, for hikers, for anything that's bipedal. And then we do a lot of advocacy work as volunteers, particularly supporting the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program and making sure that happens. We work with the city parks folks in Janesville, in Milton. We work with the Rock County Parks to support any of that. And then we're hoping to expand the Ice Age Trail in Rock County in the near future, and we're continuously working with the National Park Service as a partner and the DNR as a partner. So we just, anything and everything that we can do to support this. We do just put in a small shameless plug is with the Sustainability Committee of Janesville, with the Rock County, the newer group, Rock County Clean, that's been going out every Sunday morning picking up trash. Is May 1st at 9 o'clock. We're meeting at Palmer Park to work on picking up the trails. And we hope to do the entire 10.5 miles in Janesville of the Ice Age Trail which is on a lot of multi-use trails. So
Excellent plug, Dennis. That's great. So we have as you can tell, we have a wonderful panel for you all this evening. I've got a list of questions that I'm going to go through with the panel, and then, like I said, we'll have time for questions from the audience at the end. Again, if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and I'll keep a running list of those questions to when we get to that point of the program. But I am hoping that it'll just be kind of an open conversation. So whichever the panelists want to, chime in, please do so. So I just wanted to let everyone know that that's kind of the ground rules there. But I'm going to start with my first question. So why are so many of Janesville's peer cities around the state, as well as Alliant Energy, committing to the goal of becoming carbon neutral?
Well, maybe Jeff, sorry, maybe you go
Megan,
first.
you can go ahead. That's fine.
I was just going to say there's obviously a big movement. I talked a little bit about the communities that I worked with in 2008, 2009, 2010. Janesville had signed on at that time as an energy independent community. We didn't get Rock County. But I think, the governor's executive order 38, which creates the same goal of carbon free by 2050. And it's carbon free electricity by 2050. I think that's important. But I think never in our history has it been so clear to so many that we need to make a change in the way that we do things. Business as usual, as was mentioned, building coal-fired power plants in 2006 through 2008. We look back at that now and shake our heads and we say, why did we do that? We don't want to strand any more assets. We need to look forward. We need to think about this. And I should have mentioned in my intro, I work a lot on energy security for the state. And so I'm very concerned with the diversity of our generation fleet and with promoting more local generation nearer to where it's used. And I think that that's something that resonates with a lot of people. So I'll pass it over to you, Jeff.
And it's a lot of what I'm experiencing as well, Megan, and that's what we're seeing with Alliant Energy. There are a number of reasons why we're progressing down this path, and just to highlight what we've set as goals, we've set a goal of a 50% reduction in CO2 emissions from the electricity we generate by 2030 from 2005 levels. We've put a commitment out there to cease utilizing our coal-fired power plants by 2040. Now, keep in mind, Alliant operates in not only Wisconsin, but also in Iowa. Recently, just about a month ago, we announced the retirement of our Columbia power plant up in the Portage area in 2023 and 2024. With the retirement of that facility at the end of 2024, Alliant will have no coal-fired power plants operating in Wisconsin at that point. But we didn't stop there. We've also set an aspirational goal of net zero carbon by 2050 for the electricity that we generate. And, we have a pretty good path and a pretty good strategic plan to get us to 2040, to that commitment to be off of coal. And it's aggressive. 3 years ago, we had a different set of goals. We had 40% by 30 and 80% by 50. And 2 years later, we moved that up. And a lot of it has to do with how the technology is progressing, how things are really moving in this space, but also what our stakeholders want. We're an investor-owned utility, and the investor crew is calling for it, but our customers are as well. And our customers also include the communities that we serve. So more and more, the communities that are within our service territory are making pledges, are setting their goals and their paths forward and expressing their desires to go carbon free, carbon neutral, net zero. There's several different terms and they all have subtle little differences, but the meaning is really the same. Get to get to zero carbon, and everybody seems to be setting that mid-century target, which makes a lot of sense. On top of that, we've really, we're an energy provider, and as Megan would tell you, energy security, we need to make sure that the lights stay on. And so it's been a big day for us today. About a little over a year ago, a little under a year ago, we announced that we were going to put a gigawatt of solar into Wisconsin by 2020, end of 2023. Today, the Public Service Commission authorized 675 megawatts of that build out. That approval was granted today. So that's six solar sites totaling 675 megawatts, equating to about 175,000 homes. And we're really excited about that. That's the largest solar investment in the state that's been approved. And it supplements the energy that we have. We have a little over a gigawatt of wind already in service. We're the third largest owner operator of wind in the country. And it sets that path forward in the direction that we're heading. And like I said, we have a pretty good plan as to how to get to that 2040 goal, but it's that extra 20% that gets to be a little bit of a challenge for us in making it all the way to net zero. So we're really sharpening our pencils, working with a number of different groups to really get to that last bit, get to the finish line. And there's plenty of organizations out there that are set up trying to help us along the way. A number of our colleagues in the utility field have set similar goals, and we're putting all the chips into the middle of the table to figure out how to get there, whether it's with technological advancements on the generation side, or whether it's supplemented by some of the things that Andy was talking about in the way of carbon sinks and so on. We joined a group out of the Electric Power Research Institute and the Gas Technology Institute. They have a large activity going on for over the next 5 years, referred to as the Low Carbon Resources Initiative, LCRI. And if you haven't heard of it, I'd encourage you to go take a look. But they're looking to invest a lot of money and a lot of time and effort into research in this space. They were looking for anchor companies to get up to $100 million investment to put into this effort, and then leverage that into almost $1 billion if they can get there over a 5-year period. They've already surpassed their goal of 100 million and have more than almost 40 anchor sponsors or anchor participants, and Alliance is very happy to be one of them. And they have efforts going on now where they're rolling that out or launching it during Earth Week. And if you do get the chance, there's a lot of great panels and talks going on in that forum as well. That's may help the discussion along some. So, but that's what we're seeing. That's kind of where we're going and why. And I probably used up way too much time, but I'm excited to be here and be able to talk about it a little bit.
If I can add too, this is Maggie Dar from the city of Janesville. So, obviously I think we all know that we need to take care of our home, and, our choices today affect future generations. And so, how are we taxing future generations with our decisions today? But from a municipal level, something that's concerns me and other community leaders greatly is the effect of extreme weather on our infrastructure, on our communities. Climate change means more flooding. It means more potential for droughts. And I think we know that these sorts of events affect our most vulnerable populations the most. And so, on a global level, I think it's clear that we need to take care of the place that gives us all life on a practical day-to-day level. Climate change is very costly over time. Thanks.
That's really an excellent point. I'll just add really quickly, because Jeff brought up what the Public Service Commission has been doing. And just last week, I got approved a pilot program that will be using state energy program dollars. We're totally federally funded. We'll be deploying them to look at creating critical infrastructure microgrids. We also have a part of that program that's community resilience centers. So this is modeled on programs that we've seen crop up across the nation, and many of them, just as Maggie said, New York, Connecticut, when Hurricane Sandy came that far north, everyone said, wow, that wasn't supposed to happen. These huge storms aren't supposed to hit here. You know, Texas is the largest producer of oil and natural gas. They're not supposed to run out of energy in February, but it could happen anywhere. Montreal had a 2-week ice storm where folks were out of power. Who on this call could be out of power for 14 days? It's not reasonable to expect. So the reason why we want to look at critical infrastructure first is because it's much less controversial. We're talking about water, wastewater. You have an amazing wastewater treatment facility in Janesville. I've been there many times with their reuse of biogas. It's a fantastic way to, again, have this, as Jeff said, we're concerned about security. We need sort of an all of the above approach. We can't just, I'm not really an advocate for saying we should never combust anything again. We've got a lot of biogas in the state. It's a huge resource. Let's try to figure out how we can, use some of Andy's econometrics and understanding how our forests and our farmlands can really absorb carbon, and what we need to do for our thermal needs as well. I think that's something we're involved in at the energy office, is something called the Renewable Thermal Collaborative, because we know we have these needs, and if we're just a little more innovative and thoughtful and save more energy, I wanted to add, we've got to reduce that load. Then I think we can get there, but we sort of can't take too many things off the table right off the bat.
I don't want to dominate the conversation here between maybe the three of us, but I can't emphasize it anymore as well. We experienced with our Iowa service territory a derecho last year, which is basically an inland hurricane. Knocked out power throughout central Iowa for miles, and long-lasting effects. We have customers that are still, trying to get their roofs put back on right and fixing parts of their houses and dealing with broadband issues. They can't do video calls because it's not quite back yet. So the importance of infrastructure and security and resiliency is front of mind also. So even, while we switch over to solar power, wind power, or whatever, having those resources in place to supplement those periods of time and when the duck curve is not quite right or the power's not matching the way that the grid wants it to go. Working through all that is another area that's going to require a tremendous amount of attention that we definitely look forward to working through and have front of mind here as well.
Thank you all for weighing in on that question. During the conversation, there were a couple buzzwords that were thrown out, carbon neutral, carbon net zero, and it might be helpful for the audience just to have maybe somebody explain the difference between the two. Would somebody like to take a stab at that? I'm looking at you, Wes, if I have to call on somebody. Or Jeff, I know that you
give it a shot, Wes. I can maybe give it a start, and there are a lot of different terms that get tossed around there, but as I understand it, and then won't claim to be the authority, but I'll just say as I understand it, carbon neutral really means that you're balancing your carbon. So if you have carbon emissions, you're doing something to take that out, whether it's through carbon offsets like carbon sinks that we were talking about, or maybe even supplementing with renewable energy credits from another area. So someone's creating renewable energy someplace with wind power, solar power, whatever, renewable natural gas, whatever it might be. If you emit a ton of CO2, you require or obtain a renewable energy credit someplace else, and now you're carbon neutral. Net zero is a little different from that, because what net zero means, at least the way I understand it, or the way I use the term, is that all the carbon that you emit has to be offset internally. You can't go out and buy renewable energy credits someplace else to supplement your carbon. You have to go look at internal, like carbon sinks or offsets or other sort of natural type activity, or capture the carbon and put it into a different place through sequestration or otherwise. And so there's that. And then it's just carbon free, meaning no carbon. You know, you're not emitting any carbon anymore. So anything that you've put out previously has now been converted to something else or some different form. So your energy provider you're utilizing or have a zero carbon footprint from that perspective, or other types of activities. Your buildings are carbon free. It's quite a step to get to carbon free. Net zero carbon neutral is a little bit easier to obtain because you can get some help. I'll say to get there, even more so with net neutral than you can with net zero, or carbon neutral with net zero. Hopefully that's online with what some others think as for define it as well, but that's the way I've come to know the terms.
Yeah, I think that was a really helpful breakdown, Jeff, to make sure that we all kind of have a shared understanding of what the nomenclature is. So I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through those three different options and what the nuances are between the three. My next question is, how would the city of Janesville specifically benefit from becoming carbon neutral?
I can take that one to start with. I think, you know, and I'm a little bit late to this party, but I'm glad to be here. This is certainly an important issue. And, you know, we talk about economic development at Forward Janesville. You know, we are the Chamber of Commerce, essentially, of the Janesville area. And I think that could be an attraction point, frankly, for the city, is to be able to point to something like that, that maybe other communities can't. I mean, when you're doing economic development, you're always looking for advantages, right? Because everybody's got the greenest grass, the hard workers, the best schools, right? You're competing against every community in the country, in theory at least. And becoming carbon neutral would be a feather in our cap, I think, of something that we could put out there as a potential benefit for being here. And, you know, as you think about the business community itself, I think you're starting to see a lot of momentum towards carbon neutrality efforts. I think I read earlier today that 200 companies across the country have agreed to become carbon neutral by a certain date. And, you know, at Forward Janesville, we're going to be taking some time to survey our members, because I have to admit that I don't know every business's sustainability plan in Janesville, but it's something where we started to survey our members about a lot of different issues, and they're used to hearing from us about this stuff. So I really want to know exactly what Janesville companies are doing in terms of carbon reductions. You know, have you purchased offsets, things like that? What are you doing? Tell us about your plan. And I think that will, because obviously the business community is going to have to contribute to this to make the effort work. So that's what I would say.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on this question? Otherwise, I can move on to the next one. Well, thanks, Dan, for weighing in. I guess another question that I have is related to that as well. And Dan, you spoke to this already a little bit, but like, how does our community at large benefit from maybe the leadership of the city becoming carbon neutral? It's a little bit different, but a similar question.
I think it shows proactivity, and a way looking forward. You know, I mean, you really want to be looking out into the future and thinking about issues in a forward-thinking way. And I think this would prove that our city leaders are really looking out under the horizon, seeing what issues are out there, and wanting to lead responsibly. So I think that's definitely true.
I think also, you know, a lot of people look to government to set the standard. You know, a lot of times people look to government to address all of the wicked problems in communities, and I would say that you know, climate change is one of those wicked problems that we're facing globally, and so, you know, government often has to invest and set the standard for that. I think we have the ability to not only look at our own city operations. You know, Janesville, the city of Janesville is we're only the 10th largest employer in the community. So we are, you know, a large producer of emissions, but we're just one of them in the community. But we have benefit of being able to set policy for the entire community. And so if we look at our own operations, our city council can obviously also set policy that dictates the community's actions towards this process. We look to some of our other peer communities. You know, I'll point to the city of Eau Claire. I think that they're kind of the leader, I would say, in Wisconsin for going down this path, and most of their goals for their sustainability plan are not just focused on the city's operations, but they're community-wide goals. And so then the city puts resources and puts efforts towards encouraging and guiding the entire community along businesses, residences, as well as city operations. And so I think, you know, selfishly, a lot of times in local government, we look at ourselves as kind of the hub in the community when really we're just one of the spokes on the wheel. But I think that we have an essential place where we can set that standard and set the intention and help guide other partners in the community.
Yeah, really well said. Eau Claire came in for a grant. My office has something called the Energy Innovation Grant Program, and every October we've set a standard for having grant application instructions out. In 2018, we put out $5 million, and in 2020, it was $7 million. Eau Claire got a 2018 grant to write the Renewable Energy Action Plan. I just put a link in the chat to that. It's a culmination of a lot of work, but I really think it's a great plan to look at and to model the way that they really interacted with the community. It was amazing. And they had a lot of support from their investor-owned utility, Xcel, as well, which was really, really helpful for this whole thing. But I think that whole lead by example notion here is really, really a salient point. When we know that when people see solar panels, that starts them thinking about energy. When people think about energy, they're like, why am I spending so much money on energy? You know, I mean, it starts these cascading conversations, and they're so important to have. So the city can absolutely position itself in this way and save money for all of the taxpayers in the long run too. I think that's one thing we don't want to sort of lose sight of. Yes, it's complex. It's a wicked complex problem, as Maggie said, you know, but once we get it figured out, there should be efficiencies. Being sustainable almost never costs more money in reality.
I'd like to kind of add to what Maggie and Megan were talking about, is I think it's really important for cities to figure out their messaging, because I think most citizens, most residents don't really know what the implications of being carbon neutrally is for them. And so it helps when the city demonstrates what their priorities are and where they're really going to work to meet these goals. I think it helps citizens and residents realize what the implications will be for them, and also can be very comforting, because I think everybody just assumes it's going to be way more expensive and super inconvenient. Not everybody, but many people do. And that helps sort of bring everybody around by seeing that there's a plan and there's a strategy, and again, what it actually means for folks who have to live with those policies.
I think, like Janesville taking the leadership years ago in doing the multi-use trails, as the Ice Age Trail was coming through, being planned through Janesville as well, is combining the two. It leveraged grants, but it also gave a place for people to recreate. And having those multi-use trails, the COVID restrictions last year drove up the use of all of these trails and the parks. And coming out of this, Michael Cycles, for example, in Janesville, is still out of certain bikes because their bike sales have been so enormous. And then all the traffic calming that's been happening in Janesville, and also adding the bike lanes, and then and a perfect example of that too, as well as in the north side of Beloit on 51, where they took a 4-lane undivided highway and turned it into a 2-lane and added bike lanes. That slowed traffic down, which also helps with energy usage. I think we're seeing a lot of that. And as Janesville adds more multi-use trails or bike trails, as some people want to call them, that gives people more commuting opportunities. And I think this winter, I heard from about 6 different people that were using the trails to commute because an addition had been made near their home, and then they weren't being plowed. They were kind of upset. And so that's something that, we're going to kind of look at and say, okay, how can we get, we've got 3 sections in Janesville where volunteers plow them. But how can we get some of these plowed so that people can commute more readily? So I think that, just that leading by example is really good. And I'm just going to quote something that from a poem my dad used to carry in his wallet that's probably really pertinent, is that I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. And so by leading by example, we're showing people the way that we're not just talking about it, we're actually doing it. And I think the greatest thing Janesville's been doing lately is as they redesign some of the streets, is putting in those bike lanes. Now we've got to get some of the car people to understand that bikes also have a right to be there. So.
One thing I want to add in there is just these little incremental things that can help. The city of Eau Claire was mentioned, and back in, I think it was 2015, they started a program when any municipal tree had to be taken down. Instead of putting it in the chipper, they put it in their log yard and allowed people to use those for urban wood purposes. So instead of it just becoming another emission, people were using these to make these great live edge chairs and benches and all these different things. So it wasn't a huge savings, but what it wasn't doing was actually costing the city to deal with this wood waste. Someone else was dealing with it and typically putting into a durable wood product which stores carbon in the long term. And sometimes these little tiny things add up. It's not the whole solution, but when you start adding these things together, they suddenly start having an impact.
Yeah, that's brilliant, considering those chippers run on like a diesel mix, right? I mean, that's a 2-stroke engine that's putting out quite a lot of emissions. And something we didn't kind of talk about, the transportation sector. If you really get to carbon neutral and you include the transportation sector, there's a ton of benefits in terms of air quality and the health of your citizens. But what a neat idea on the trees in Eau Claire.
I'm trying to post the link right now to Wisconsin Urban Wood, which has a story about it here.
I was just going to add to what you said, Andy. I think that it is really important to think about that incremental progress is progress. I mean, when you think about, is here getting to carbon neutral? I mean, I think a lot of people think, oh man, it could take, years for the infrastructure financing to fall in place, that we could install like new zero emissions hardware, technology at our business. I mean, there are things that businesses and individuals can do today, right now, to reduce their footprint, not only through steps that you take as a personal level, but through potentially purchasing carbon offsets. I mean, businesses could show up tomorrow morning and start to purchase these things and start to offset their footprint right away. I mean, I think that's something that that's been interesting to me as I've done my research on this, is that, this is something that we can all be doing every single day.
That's such a really good point. And I wanted to say one more thing about Focus on Energy, our statewide ratepayer funded energy efficiency and renewable energy program. Dan, I hope all the businesses in Janesville are taking advantage of what Focus has out there. It's something where I think small businesses, we have trouble getting as much uptake. The large energy users know who they are and they know they want to reduce that and they get on it. But it's all of our money going into that pot. And we've got a lot of innovative programs coming back. If there's other ideas that folks have, Focus on Energy is sort of the other half of my office at Public Service Commission. So we're always looking for, we have these huge quadrennial planning sessions, but we're always looking for different ways to connect with communities and help them reduce that energy usage, because that's your first step. Let's just take down what we're using. And for businesses, you can see that bottom line almost right away, and cities. So just throw that out there.
And I'd like to encourage all of you that if you have innovative programs and services like this that you'd like to get the word out to the business community, please contact me after the call. We're a conduit. We do a lot of information sharing with our businesses and our members, and we would love to share this kind of information with them, because you know how it is during the pandemic. Information has been, it's been a tsunami of information about everything under the sun, and some things can get lost. So I would encourage all of you to send me links and information about the programs you have that could be beneficial to businesses.
This is Dennis again. I'm going to jump back about 35 years when I was in maintenance in a facility, and energy efficient ballast and bulbs were coming out, and the corporate said, we want you to switch to energy efficient ballast and bulbs. And I kind of did an analysis of it, and I said, okay, we can do that, but we can reduce our energy by about 60% like that if we just make people turn off the lights when they leave their offices. And so we started that program. And so something as simple as that reduced the energy. And payback at the time was about 15 years on some of those things. They were pretty expensive. So people need to kind of, keep an eye on that. What are the simple things you can do to begin actually reducing energy? And then if you have to replace those things, I think some of the LED lights and such for lighting, and in most factories, 80% of their energy cost is lighting. Those LED bulbs reduce it almost immediately. And my son just tuned me in last week to that they've got wireless LED bulbs that he can actually control from his smartphone, and he can turn on groups of lights, or he can change the color of his lights. He can reduce, he can dim them down when he doesn't need them just by a simple touch on his phone or Alexis. So there's lots of ways companies can begin to reduce, by not necessarily purchasing something. And I always look at it as kind of like, what is that total energy cost for that new electric motor that might be more energy efficient? Because if it's still got some service life in it, is what can I do on the machine to make that motor more efficient? Because if I just throw away a 3-year-old motor to buy a new energy efficient motor, what energy that was used to make that motor, and now what energy has to be used to get rid of that old motor? Those are all considerations businesses need to do as well. That total cost of ownership.
Yeah, Dennis, I appreciate your comments. It kind of leads into my next question, which is looking into the weeds a little bit more, and like thinking through logistically, what are some of the things that the city of Janesville is going to have to consider doing in order to meet the goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050?
Well, for me, I would start just saying, I'm a task-oriented person, and so having a goal is a great place to start, but we need a plan for how we're going to get there. And so, as was mentioned earlier, when the resolution to become carbon neutral by 2050 was adopted by the City Council, staff's recommendation was to have the council include that in our next iteration of our strategic plan and put a little funding aside to have somebody help us see what that looks like and to set measurable goals. We have a lot of operations that create a lot of emissions. I would say, it seems like most of them are in my department. So, we operate our own landfill, which, creates a whole lot of carbon dioxide, about 110,000 tons a year. So that's, what do I have here? That's the equivalent of about 277 million miles driven in a passenger vehicle a year. So that's significant. And, it sounds like a dirty, bad thing, but really we're all very fortunate to have a local landfill because we all produce waste. And so we have a landfill in Janesville to receive that. And so, that's just one of the areas that we have to consider. It was mentioned transportation and our fleet. There's options, there's alternative fuel sources, or there's electric vehicles that are out there that we can look at for some of our fleet of vehicles. Police cars, some communities have been converting their police squad fleet to electric vehicles. Some of our equipment, there's not at this point a ready alternative that's equivalently as good. We have a lot of heavy diesel operated equipment. But so I think for us, it's very important that we look at that. We look at how much carbon we're producing, and we start to look at what are realistic and measurable goals to get us to that final goal. And so there's just a lot of areas to look at. I just mentioned the landfill and our fleet being two, but obviously there's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and I don't know how old your landfill is. Sorry, Dan.
No, go ahead.
But in Dane County, we're harvesting a lot of biogas off that active landfill, and almost all the municipal snow plows are powered with that biogas. So that might be an additional study. I'll just throw that plug out for this Energy Innovation Grant Program. We'll be on the street in October, and we have had the first 2 rounds, and I always advocate for it, a comprehensive energy planning section, because it's really important to have a comprehensive plan that you have a lot of help with, and that you get funding to do that plan, because Alliant can help you on a lot of the baseline stuff, and they can help you with a lot of the sort of utility information, but there's so much more to it, and so many more different little areas of feasibility that you may want to explore. Last thing on plans is that I love that this would be involved in the strategic plan. I think it's important that you want to talk to Rock County about their hazard mitigation plan. There's a lot of funding coming out of FEMA. That's a big pot of money called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. It's replacing all of their pre-hazard disaster mitigation programs, and it specifically funds proactive measures by communities, but they have to be in your hazard mitigation plan. So if you have a carbon-free goal and you want to make sure that your wastewater treatment facility never stops working, or whatever, or water utility, write these things, work with Rock County. It looks like that plan was last updated in 2017. It's probably going through an update right now. It's something that I'm working with every county and tribal nation on, is trying to marry up those plans with your emergency support function 12 energy plans, and set yourself up for this funding in the future, because there's a lot of funding coming from this Fed. And I think Wisconsin needs to be positioned. We don't have too many hurricanes, but we do get those derechos that Jeff mentioned. We do have ice storms. We have capacity to have a ton of catastrophic events. So it's really worth it to make sure these plans line up. Sorry, Dan, that's a really long time.
No, that's okay. I think it's really important for the city, and I know that they're looking at it now, but to make sure that our infrastructure is up to date when it comes to electric vehicle charging stations. These electric cars are here to stay, obviously, and I think that private businesses have stepped up, and there's a few here and there around town. And I know that during the city's legislative roundtable discussion with state legislators, the city manager was talking a little bit about potentially some funding from state and potentially federal government for electric vehicle charging stations. So I think it's important that we stay on top of that infrastructure and maybe be out ahead, because we don't want to be left behind in that.
Well, and another place that has opportunities for funding is the nonprofit sector, and looking at partnerships that exist between service agencies in town that may be able to try some innovative projects on a small scale that then could demonstrate here's what's working for us, and here might be ways to scale that project. So for instance, Welty is working with the Head Start in Beloit, as well as Community Action's Merrill Neighborhood Sharing Garden, to recreate their community sharing garden at the Head Start site for Head Start students, families, and for their community. But along with that, we are trying to figure out a way, and this is all still in the works, but we're trying to figure out composting at this garden site that would incorporate the organic food waste from the Head Start site, so that we're kind of doing this closed system of both community garden, dealing with food insecurity, and making sort of healthy produce available to that neighborhood, but also how do we close the circle so that the site's organic waste that comes out of the meals they feed the kids, the breakfast and the lunch, can get processed in a way that we can compost it safely, efficiently, and then use that to amend the soil, so that this could get expanded so that the city could start thinking about what does it take to remove our organic food waste from trash pickup and from the landfill, because it's a huge source of methane gas when it decomposes in landfills. So ours would be a very, very tiny little project, but it would sort of give you the steps of what's a roadmap to start expanding it, say, to the school district of Beloit, and then to maybe the whole community of Beloit. And there's money available to develop these kinds of plans. And so that's a way the nonprofit agencies could take on some of this innovation and learning, and then pass what they learn on to the city, so that it could be done on a community-wide scale.
I just wanted to throw in
Just
one
to add to a couple of points. Sorry, Andy.
I'll be really quick.
Go
Jeff.
ahead.
I wanted to piggyback on what Dennis said earlier a little bit, and that is this idea of trade-offs. And almost no good deed goes unpunished. The idea that there's always something, there's almost always a negative going with a positive, and just to understand the full life cycle of what we're looking at. You use the example of electric vehicles. I'll say it. I own one. I have a Nissan Leaf. I went into it, but I know that it's a zero emission vehicle, but there are emissions coming from that power plant. Getting better, Jeff. I know it. With more electrical, but those batteries are full of chemicals that are going to cost later to dispose of and have another environmental risk. So all I'm saying is, I'm not trying to throw water on this, but the idea that we need to understand the full life cycle of these things and the scale at which they affect us is really important.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That was one of, I guess there's a lot being out there right now in this discussion, a lot of different points to touch on, and I'm sitting on my hands just a little bit, but I'll chime in here too. But one of the things, Andy, that you hit on is something I wanted to mention as well, is renewable energy doesn't necessarily mean sustainable for the reasons that Andy pointed to. There's life cycle costs and so on, and trying to find ways to bring those back, whether it's solar panels or batteries or what have you. There's a cost to developing them, there's a cost to disposing of them, and you get the benefit in the middle, but weighing that cost benefit analysis is important. And to Brenda's point, real quick there, the league actually in Wisconsin Rapids did a project that looked at composting up there in Marathon County a number of years ago, and it came up with some pretty innovative ideas that you may want to check in with them and get some lessons learned up there. A fellow that was an old colleague of mine when I worked for DNR, a guy named Joe Ansel, led that project up there, and I'm sure you could track him down. Then on the transportation side of things, the number one greenhouse gas emitter of all industry or all sectors in the country, in the world for that matter, is not electric power generation, it's transportation. It's the cars we drive, it's the vehicles that we use to move about, the buses and so on. And they've been fairly flat emission-wise and beginning to drop maybe a bit with electrified vehicles, but the utility sector has surpassed them in their reductions. But electrification may hold a key in a lot of areas where we talk about just the workplace and the homeowner and so on. The more that's electrified, the more emissions are taken out of the air, and you start looking at that energy wallet, and maybe things get a little greener, and not only from from an environmental perspective, but maybe a few more dollars in the wallet at the end. Now, one of the things I also wanted to touch on was renewable energy and environmental justice, and low income areas or racially minority type areas, and trying to find ways to match those up, because really sometimes the dollars aren't there or the attention isn't provided in those areas as it should. And not everybody can afford to put solar panels on their homes or on their businesses. And it's one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about as well, and have done. Started some customer owned or community based solar projects that target those types of areas. We got one that's going in Beaver Dam, one that was just approved in Kohler just earlier this week, Fond du Lac as well. Not big setups comparatively speaking to utility scale, but they do provide some benefit to the areas as well. And there are trade-offs that can be had in those spaces, but every little bit helps incrementally move things forward. Megan mentioned Dane County and the landfill, the development of renewable natural gas. But one of the things Dane County is doing as well with their buildings is Dan mentioned credits or offsets. They're buying offsets. They're grabbing renewable energy credits to offset the emissions that their buildings release as they're operating. In fact, we're partnering with them to put a solar field by the Dane County landfill to help them offset some of the energy that they'll be using or creating from the buildings as well. So the opportunities are out there, but like Megan said, the plan becomes important too. And more communities around the state and around the country are developing climate action plans that begin to set up that strategy going forward and put all hands on deck, or all the cards on the table to start weighing options and come up with some good ideas and begin to set that path forward. So a lot there. I hadn't chimed in for a little bit, but I wanted to make sure I hit on the number of different areas that have been talked about.
What are some of the barriers that the city of Janesville could encounter while trying to achieve this goal?
Well, I think Jeff just talked about one that's really apparent, is that we have a lot of income disparity across the community. I mean, it's across the whole state. Every community has this, but we've got an environmental justice community in Janesville. That could be a big barrier. And when you're talking about making these kind of historic investments in your community, I think you can have detractors, folks who say, why would you spend that money on that? Don't do that. I don't want that. So I think it's messaging was mentioned. I think it's really important. It's great that we have, the Chamber of Commerce perspective here, because you need the business community on board. Everyone should be on board. And that's why I, worked across several different administrations for the state, but we still keep moving forward on renewable energy because we can equate it with resilience. We can equate it with saving money. We can equate it with making jobs. And I think it's really important that we make sure that that's why I advocate for that planning process, because everyone should be able to air their grievances, talk about what they don't like, and we should cost it out and duke it out. Let's figure, everyone has something to win or lose here as we talk about our home and our planet. But some people like to really talk about that in terms of greenbacks and that life cycle that Dennis talked about. These are all important things, and we should talk about all of them. One last thing on the community solar, we're actually working on a project to try to come up with a tariff that would specifically leverage investments in low-income folks that we already make through the energy assistance program, but have those tied to community solar, so we have an ongoing monthly benefit instead of that one-time benefit that folks get. Because I think that, somewhere between energy efficiency and renewable energy and some better buildings, we might be able to nip some of this energy poverty in the bud, because we've seen a lot of it with the pandemic. Arrearage is getting really high, and it's just time to think differently about a lot of stuff. And I know Alliance working on it, and we're working on it from the energy office too. So kudos to Janesville for getting in the weeds on this.
I'll jump in and mention just a few barriers that kind of pop into my head. And I think it was kind of mentioned with the court of public opinion, but often even the stuff that makes financial sense and environmental sense and all the sense in the world. If it's something that doesn't fit your particular worldview, then often people will push back, and those people tend to be pretty vocal about it. An example that I can bring up that Uw-Platteville just achieved was to build a 2.4 megawatt solar array on their campus, using funds that generally wouldn't have been available for solar in the past, just because solar technology has advanced so far that it's now feasible within a 15-year payback period to make it happen. And even with that, you look at, you should know better than to read the comment section on social media, but, you hear a lot of the, this doesn't make sense, we shouldn't be doing this. Just a lot of like, old thinking, I guess, in some sense, not really forward thinking and not embracing the technology for where it's at, and basing your decisions on where it was. And I think 10 years ago it was a lot more challenging to do solar financially than it is now. So the landscape has changed, and I think Jeff kind of talked to that a little bit. At Whitewater, the big barrier is we were talking about doing 70 layoffs over the last year. So finding money to invest in anything other than just maintaining our float, basically staying upright, has been really challenging. So I think, maybe the city has similar challenges along that lines with budget, and it's always a pretty fraught area when you're dealing with public dollars to, redirect that towards investment in the future like that. But I think there's a really good case to be made to continue doing that regardless, and always set aside a portion of your funds for that. And I think on that same token, one of the things that we struggle with is, and I think the city can also empathize with this, is just staffing and time. Just to do data collection, and I know Megan is well aware of this, just to do data collection to compile a report takes a long time to really get all the information that you need to really report out on exactly how you're performing, and it's challenging to find the staff for it. So there's just a few barriers that kind of keep you in the status quo, basically dealing with the day-to-day here to now more than the future.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, Wes. I would agree wholeheartedly with all of those. I think, as I mentioned, our ownership and operation of a municipal landfill presents a challenge. And to Megan's point, we do collect gas at both of our closed landfill site and our current operational active landfill. So there is some effort there. I also will give a plug. Right now we have a request for qualifications out. We're looking for proposals to study the feasibility of putting putting solar infrastructure on our landfill sites, and how that looks, and how we work with our regulatory requirements from the DNR, and also having those active gas extraction wells and potentially solar infrastructure there. So there's a lot of complexities, but that's something that we're studying right now, or we hope to study, and we hope to get a consultant in who can help us along that process. But as Wes mentioned, for us, a big barrier is cost. And I do agree that we have to be forward thinking, and we have to look long term, and investing now could save us long term. I think we all recognize that. Our difficulty is that initial investment sometimes. And, anyone who's paid attention to City of Janesville stuff has heard this 1,000 times, so I'm sorry to beat a dead horse, but Janesville, we have the third lowest property taxes per capita among our peer communities. We have the fourth lowest property tax per capita, and the third lowest amount of state shared revenue per capita. Combined of all of our peer cities, we have by far the least revenue per capita, and we are severely limited in the state of Wisconsin in how we can generate revenue. And so every year, our city council knows intimately, and our city administration knows intimately that we are kind of fighting for what programs do we have to consider cutting this year in order to make our budget balance. And so that's when some of these more longer term investments get put to the wayside, unfortunately. And as Wes mentioned too, just having dedicated staff time, you'll see I'm representing the operations division, and we deal a lot with these sustainability issues, and I think all of our departments do, but there's a lot of communities that have a dedicated sustainability office, and at least a staff person who is able to focus on these interdepartmental projects. And we just don't have that right now in Janesville. And, you know, when it comes to budget time, that position is competing with police officers on the streets or firefighters, and getting those staffed at the level of our peer communities. And so, you know, I don't want to sound it all short-sighted, but I certainly think that when it comes to, you know, the court of public opinion, that makes it harder to get some of these projects and the initial investment there.
Something else that I think will probably be a challenge for all of the cities in this area is just making sure that voices are heard as far as big plans that will affect everybody's lives, because a lot of these actions seem very homeowner, property owner focused. And at least certainly Beloit has a lot of renters who maybe their utility bill isn't even an issue for them, or, you know, whatever. And so to get by, and another thing is age too, because, you know, non-voters will be extremely affected by all of these choices that we make. So figuring out how to really listen and be able to collect, because there may be stakeholders that we aren't normally considering, but that their input would be really valuable and useful in considering how to make feasible policy that can really be implemented.
Just taking a look at the time, and I want to make sure that all of the attendees know that feel free to submit a question if you have a question for our panelists. I know we've gotten one or two so far, but I just want to put in another plug for audience questions. And if you put them in the chat, I'll be able to pick them up and ask for you. I am going to pivot now into asking some of the audience questions. The first one is, how is the city setting its baseline data to begin setting target reductions per year?
Well, one thing I will say is that in 2019, we joined the Green Tier Communities statewide program, and that was something that the city had tried to do many years ago before my time in Janesville, and that failed. So we're excited that that was successful and pushed forward by the Sustainable Janesville Committee, of which some of our panelists have been or are members of. So thank you for that. Wes is giving me the thumbs up. So one of the requirements of that program is to do an annual report and do some benchmarking. So they've established a scorecard that we have to self-assess along a whole lot of different areas. So our transportation management, our natural resources, water and wastewater utilities, and along policies, how our city policies contribute or detract from these efforts. And so we now self-assess on an annual basis, and part of that process is that we get the scores of all of the other communities that are members in the state. And so that helps us see where we're behind and where we need to work, and maybe where there's other communities that can help lead us in the right direction. So that's kind of more on a global level. But you know, also our inclusion of this in our strategic plan and determining how to meet this carbon neutral goal is, I think, also to be a big way of how we get there and how we establish those benchmarks. In light of our budgetary restrictions, how do we set goals that have the biggest bang for our buck? You know, in terms of what's the low hanging fruit, and you know, helping us better develop plans.
I'll just add before Megan jumps in. Sorry. We're fortunate at Whitewater that Megan actually does a lot of our benchmarking for us on a global level. But you know, what we found ultimately is that when we want to start digging into energy efficiency and really making changes, we need to benchmark at the building level. So a tool that we started using at Whitewater, which is a free tool from the U.S. Department of Energy, is the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So we're migrating data into that. So sometimes it's challenging to get building level data, and especially at a level of granularity that makes it useful for making decisions. So getting it on a monthly basis versus an hourly basis makes a big difference on how you use energy day to day. But it's a really helpful tool to at least start understanding how each of your individual facilities under your jurisdiction, whether you're a city or a campus, have their own individual contributions to your overall load. And then you can start targeting what we call the energy hogs a little bit more directly.
And Wes, let's follow up because we are trying to get a little more granularity into the state energy report. Again, it's 75 million gross square feet of space that we're benchmarking. So it's really a high level report, but so I've got like 2,000 utility accounts, and many of which we receive 15-minute data for. But that's peak, and that's important, as Jeff and Wes know very well. But I just wanted to say on the benchmarking, because obviously it's where I live. We have benchmarked every wastewater and water utility in the state. The water utilities have to report their detailed energy usage to the Public Service Commission. We did a program with DNR wastewater. It's really voluntary, but we get good data for about 584 of the 650 publicly owned treatment works across the state. So we've got a really good idea of what's going on at your wastewater treatment facility, and we can give you that granular data. It's obviously, we use public funds to get it. It's free for anyone. As I saw Joe Zimmer's question in the chat, most folks when they're benchmarking do not think about area mode. I think that's really interesting. And I know that the Janesville Wastewater Treatment Facility has a biogas powered mower, which is like, it literally says Excalibur. It's like the coolest mower you've ever seen in your life. But that's not something that's always involved in an energy use baseline. I'm happy to follow up with anyone. We have several consultants who we work with who've done this kind of benchmarking for municipalities. Again, I think Janesville working with Alliant probably makes a ton of sense for you guys, and you might not even have to pay a consultant to do all the building level stuff, but I won't speak for Jeff on that one.
No, and that's right. With the new metering that's been put in, we're able to really get to time of use type data that shows when most energy is being utilized and how much, when, how, where. That can provide some important baseline data figures to help decision making.
Another question was, what impact might the new federal infrastructure money have in Janesville?
Well, I know we're kind of eagerly awaiting that. Some more definitions on using that funding, and particularly future funding specifically for infrastructure projects. And so I mentioned our study that we would like to do of installing solar infrastructure at our landfills. And so we see that as being potentially a great use of federal funding for infrastructure projects. I think that's just one example of a project that would be ripe for funding like that. Obviously, there's a whole vetting process that would have to go through, and I'm just one staff person, and we have a governing body that helps make those decisions. So, but that's one project that we've talked about could be a good use of future infrastructure funds.
I'm glad you brought that up again, because I wanted to say, I think that there's brownfields grant funding through EPA that could be, I would refer you to Andy to get you to the right person at DNR to talk about brownfields. But that's specifically grant money that's there for redeveloping a site like a landfill. Eau Claire did a big study with NREL years ago to look at putting solar on their closed landfill. I'd be happy to send that to you. Actually, I have a copy. Unfortunately, it wasn't totally feasible, but that was a number of years ago. That was like 8 years ago. And so my understanding of this new infrastructure package is it's really broadband, wastewater, water focused. So, there's a big push to get rid of all the lead lines. It may be a great time to take your wastewater treatment facility all the way to net zero. I'm not sure, but I think we're still waiting on a lot of guidance, but hopefully it can be invested in ways that will certainly help Janesville in the future. But I will send you that study, Maggie.
Yeah, DNR does have a program called I believe it's called the EDGE program that looks at brownfield redevelopments that provides, like Megan said, opportunities there for revitalization of those types of properties. And Maggie, we do have a little bit of experience ourselves with siting solar on top of a landfill. In fact, our ash landfill at our Rock River Station down there on Town Line Road has 2.3 megawatts of solar sited on top of it. So we were able to put it down on top of the cap without disturbing the contents below. So it's possible, and I'm sure we'd have some folks that would be more than happy to chat with you a little bit about what happened there or how we're able to do that.
Oh, thanks, Megan. I was just going to say, all you have to do is go to the website and put in brownfields and you'll come up with it. One of the things I wanted to mention too is it's not the federal budget, but in the governor's budget, as you may remember, he put in an increased amount of dollars for urban tree plantings that would be used by cities who qualify. So there's a distinct possibility that there could be funding available for that. And just as Eileen, can I share my screen really briefly?
I think so. Try it, and if it doesn't work, we'll try and get you permissions, but I think you should be able to do it.
Then let me know if this is coming up. When you're seeing a map of Janesville, let me know.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, this is actually our community canopy map. And talking about a baseline, canopy is really good, right? I'm just going to zoom in, and you'll notice the closer I get, suddenly the colors will change. And it isn't mode, but the white is impervious surface. The light green is vegetated, in other words, grass or light grass, and the dark green is canopy. And so this is based on 2013 imagery. You can call our folks through, you can look at it on our urban forestry part of the website, and they can help you set up a fact sheet for Janesville, which gives you an idea about this and the value that that urban canopy gives, not only in carbon storage, but in great things like stormwater reduction, clean water, public health benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And going back, I know I'm going to try and not to talk too much, but going back to the idea of social justice, we do know, interestingly, and this has been documented several times, communities of color and of lower income have less tree canopy and therefore get less of the benefits that a canopy can provide. And so one of the things to look at is we can actually assess this with a tool like that in a place like Janesville and help maybe focus where some of these efforts might go. Idea to throw out there.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about this discussion this evening is seeing some of like the real-time connections that are being made. And I'm really fortunate that we have a lot of great stakeholders on the panel. But this makes me wonder, what are some of the other key stakeholders that need to be involved so that Janesville can be successful in meeting the goal?
I certainly think that major businesses in town should be involved in this discussion, and I look forward to bringing some of those folks to the table just to see what their concerns are. I'm going to be talking to them all, so hopefully we'll be able to get a good handle on that. But I'd love to see businesses and citizens at the table just to hear their concerns and find out what the potential barriers are.
I would imagine the school district is a big one.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those. And I think that
Oh, Maggie, I think that you are frozen or we're having trouble hearing you. At least I know I am.
that, you know, all of our stakeholders, the city can lead the way and set this out of their goals, do focus. Still, are you still having trouble hearing me? Is this good?
Sometimes it's better if you
Okay,
like,
stop me
go
if
off
I'm still
camera for a second,
frozen. Okay.
and then we can just hear your voice. Maybe without the camera, it just takes less bandwidth.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
That
Is this
sounds
better? Okay, great. So I was just saying, so the city of Eau Claire, going back to their plan, and a lot of the goals are focused inward on city operations, but a lot of the goals are too focused on community. And so, things like reducing electricity usage on residential properties, and businesses and institutions, converting more vehicles to electric vehicles, not just from the city, but community-wide. I know I've heard of cities that are going to a model of pay as you throw, so a consumption-based model for waste collection. And that's something that's not necessarily the most popular of everybody, but one of the ways that you reduce your carbon is diverting a lot of that solid waste from the landfill. And so, we do have a recycling program, and we also have a compost site right next to our landfill, which is great. But how do we encourage more use of that? And some communities have gone the route of a consumption-based model of that's how you pay for collection. And so that's not something that's been discussed in Janesville, but that's certainly a goal to reduce what's making it to the landfill. There's ways to achieve that. So I think that a lot of the ways that we reduce our emissions end up affecting all of the stakeholders in the community. So appreciate everyone on the call who has ideas and also that's willing to step up and do their part.
I'll just say really generally, I spend a lot of time preaching to the choir on campus. I get invited to classes that have to do with sustainability from faculty that are interested in sustainability, and I hang out with students that love sustainability. So stakeholders that maybe don't really get this yet, or maybe even are opposed to it, and trying to engage them regularly, I think is a big piece. So you can at least start to convert a few of them over. If nothing else, speak to the economic benefit, because there are a lot of them.
And I think just the idea of reuse, and a number of years ago, I shared, was right next to somebody from Goodwill at Rotary Gardens on Earth Day. And he talked about, just the donations that they get. And I said, you must get a lot of clothes that are bad and can't be sold. And he said, we sell it for felt. So we find a way to reuse all of that. So if somebody gives us something that, essentially nobody else is going to want, we have a market for it. He finds markets for them. And, when we lived up in the Oregon area and near Madison, some of that stuff you couldn't give away, but there was still somebody that could use it. So I really, applaud the Goodwill in Janesville that finds places for some of this stuff. And then, and I wish more people would compost, but we do, but more people should be doing that.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us for a great discussion. I think you've given us all a lot to think about, and potential next steps, some barriers to consider, ideas of stakeholders to bring into the conversation. So I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out this evening to be part of our panel. And thank you to our attendees for being part of the conversation as well. We do want to remind everyone that City Council will be discussing the city's strategic plan in July. And if you want them to include carbon neutrality in the plan and think through what the next steps are, please let them know. Write them, call them, attend an upcoming council meeting to let them know what you think. So thank you all for joining us, and happy Earth Day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Happy Earth Day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So long.
I'm going to stop the recording now.